The cake was already sliced when I heard it. My mother leaned toward my father, lowering her voice the way she does when she believes something is private simply because she whispers it. She doesn't need to know we sold her house. The words slid across the table like a misplaced utensil, quiet but sharp. For a second I thought I had misheard her. The room was warm with birthday laughter, glasses clinking, my brother telling a story too loudly. My name was written in frosting across the cake, uneven but cheerful. Sold her house. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. I kept my expression neutral and paused halfway to my mouth. My father nodded slightly. "It's done," he murmured. "No reason to complicate things." Complicated? The house wasn't complicated. It was mine. 10 years earlier my father had transferred the deed into my name for protection, he said. In case anything ever happens. I had believed him. And now at my own birthday dinner they were speaking about it as if it were an inconvenience to disclose. I set my fork down carefully. No one else seemed to notice the shift in my breathing. My brother continued laughing. My aunt reached for another slice of cake. What they didn't know was I already had copies of the deed. 10 years ago the transfer felt like a gesture of trust. My father called me into his study one Sunday afternoon. He had already placed the documents neatly on his desk, clipped together, highlighted in places he wanted me to notice. "It's just a precaution," he said. "Property taxes are rising. Liability issues are unpredictable. This way the house stays protected." Protected. He explained it calmly, almost strategically. Putting the house in my name would shield it from potential business disputes tied to his contracting work. He insisted on smart planning. I remember the way he slid the key across the desk after I signed. "Keep this," he said. "It's yours now." The metal felt heavier than it had when I was younger. Not because it changed physically, but because the meaning did. Ownership carries weight. At the time I interpreted it as reconciliation. A quiet acknowledgement that I had proven responsible. That despite the occasional tension in our family, I was trusted with something significant. The house wasn't grand. It was the same modest property I grew up in with creaky stairs and outdated fixtures. But it represented stability. It represented legitimacy. Every year after the transfer I requested updated copies of the deed and tax filings for my own records. Not out of suspicion, just a habit. Documentation was something I had learned to respect. The key stayed in a small ceramic bowl near my entryway. I didn't visit often, but it remained mine on paper. So when I heard my mother whisper that they had sold it, the shock wasn't emotional first. It was procedural. Because houses don't simply transfer without signatures. And mine had never been withdrawn. Looking back, the signs had been there. 6 months before my birthday dinner my mother casually mentioned they were updating a few things at the house. New windows. Landscaping. Minor renovations. Just improving the value, she said over the phone. It's smart to keep options open. Options. I didn't question it. Property maintenance is normal. Necessary even. But when the property tax statement arrived in my email that quarter, the assessed value had jumped significantly. I requested clarification from the county office out of habit. The representative confirmed that a building permit had been filed by my father. Signed. I had not been informed. The permit listed minor structural adjustments, nothing dramatic, but the documentation carried language that suggested preparation for market listing. I called my father. "We're just evaluating possibilities," he said. "Nothing final." Evaluating possibilities. The phrase sounded rehearsed. A few weeks later my mother mentioned downsizing during a casual family call. "Your father and I don't need that much space anymore." I reminded her gently that the property was in my name. "Yes, of course," she replied quickly. "We know that." The reassurance felt too smooth. I began reviewing public property listings periodically, not obsessively, just attentively. The house didn't appear under its address, but I noticed similar homes in the neighborhood being marketed aggressively. The financial shifts weren't explosive. They were incremental. Permit filings. Value reassessments. Offhand remarks about market timing. It wasn't betrayal yet, but it was a movement. And movement without communication is rarely accidental. The whisper at my birthday table wasn't the first hint. It was confirmation. She doesn't need to know we sold her house. Sold. Not planning to sell. Not considering offers. Sold. I remained still listening as my father leaned slightly closer to my mother. The transfer cleared last week, he murmured. Funds are already allocated. Allocated. The word felt clinical. My brother continued telling a story about his promotion. My aunt laughed at something unrelated. Plates were being passed. Wine was poured. Public normalcy wrapped itself around private betrayal. I felt the fracture internally before I showed any reaction. Allocated meant there had been a closing, a contract, a signature, but I hadn't signed anything. The timeline aligned too precisely with the building permit filings and the sudden renovation expenses. They hadn't been improving value for protection. They had been preparing it for sale. Under my name. I excused myself from the table without drama. No confrontation. No accusation. In the hallway I steadied my breathing. It wasn't the rage I felt first. It was a calculation. Houses do not legally transfer without authorization. Closings require documentation. Signatures are recorded. Title insurance leaves trails. If a sale had occurred, it had either been fraudulent or manipulated. I returned to the table with my composure intact. No one noticed the difference. Because betrayal doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in that moment is react emotionally instead of structurally. I didn't accuse them. I went home and opened my filing cabinet. The drawer labeled property slid out smoothly. I keep everything organized: tax returns and insurance policies, title documents. Not because I distrust people, but because I distrust assumptions. Inside a clear plastic folder was the original deed transfer from 10 years ago. Signed by my father. Notarized. Recorded. My name is listed as sole owner. I sat at my desk and read it again slowly, line by line. Parcel number. Legal description. Transfer date. There were no ambiguities. The property was mine. If a sale had been completed, it would require my signature. Or a power of attorney. Or something equally documented. I had signed nothing. I logged into the county recorder's website and searched for the parcel number. The status had changed. A transfer had been recorded 3 days earlier. Buyer information listed. Closing date confirmed. My breath didn't quicken. It steadied. I downloaded the public record. The deed showed my name in the seller line. And beneath it, a signature that resembled mine. Resembled, but not identical. The shape was similar. The flow was slightly off. The pressure is uneven. I printed the document and placed it beside my original deed. Side by side, the difference was clear. Someone had signed on my behalf. Or forged it. The tension wasn't emotional. It was structural. Because selling a property without legal authority isn't a family misunderstanding. It's a fraud. I didn't call my parents. Not yet. I opened my email archive and retrieved every copy of the property tax notices, insurance statements, and original transfer documents. I scanned them into a single file. The power wasn't in confrontation. It was in documentation. And documentation was now on my side. The public record wasn't enough. I needed the full closing file. The next morning I called the title company listed on the transfer. My tone was steady and neutral. I identified myself as the property owner and requested a certified copy of the executed documents. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Of course, the representative said, "Let me verify your identity." Identity. The irony was almost too precise. Within hours, a secure link appeared in my inbox. I downloaded the file and opened it carefully. Purchase agreement. Escrow instructions. Final settlement statement. And the seller authorization form. There was my name again. Typed correctly. Signed imperfectly. I zoomed in on the digital signature page. The notarization stamp was legitimate. The notary's seal is authentic. But the acknowledgement section showed a driver's license number I didn't recognize. Not mine. The signature had been notarized under an ID that wasn't mine, which meant one of two things. Either someone impersonated me, or someone provided false identification to facilitate the transaction. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes briefly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't miscommunication. It was a procedural deception. The settlement statement showed wire transfers already dispersed. Funds allocated to an account ending in numbers I recognized. My parents' joint account. allocated just as my father had whispered. The legal jeopardy was immediate. Forgery carries consequences. Title fraud triggers investigations. Escrow misrepresentation can unravel entire transactions. I printed the closing documents and placed them beside the original deed. The contrast was no longer emotional. It was evidentiary. And evidence doesn't argue. It waits. I didn't call my parents. I called an attorney. Not a family friend. Not someone recommended casually. A property litigation specialist with experience in title disputes and fraudulent transfers. Her office had understated neutral walls and organized shelves with no unnecessary decoration. She reviewed the documents without commentary for several minutes. "Have you authorized this sale in any capacity?" she asked finally. "No." "Have you granted power of attorney to anyone?" "No." She nodded once and turned the closing file toward me. "The notarization ID does not match your driver's license," she said. "That's significant." Significant. The word felt calm but decisive. We examined the title insurance policy next. It protected the buyer against undisclosed ownership disputes, but it did not shield the seller from fraudulent execution. "In short," she said evenly, "this sale is legally vulnerable." Vulnerable. I felt something steady rather than relieved. "What are my options?" I asked. "Immediate notice of dispute to the title company. Freeze further disbursement if possible. Notify the buyer's counsel. And potentially file a petition to invalidate the transfer." She paused. "You'll need to decide how aggressive you want to be." Aggressive? The word didn't fit. "This isn't aggression," I replied. "It's a correction." She allowed a slight smile. "Then we proceed structurally. No raised voices. No emotional language. Just documented irregularities and procedural next steps." When I left her office, the file under my arm felt heavier, but not because of anger. Because of preparation. And preparation changes the outcome before confrontation ever begins. I made the call from my car before driving home. The number for the bank handling the escrow transfer was printed clearly on the settlement statement. I requested to speak with someone in fraud prevention. The representative's voice was measured and procedural. "I'm calling regarding a property sale that was executed without my authorization," I said. "The seller's signature is fraudulent." There was a pause. "May I have the property address and case number?" she asked. I provided both. I could hear typing in the background. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "there is a pending flag on this transaction." Pending? Flagged by whom? I asked. "By the title company this morning," she replied. "They received notice of a potential signature discrepancy." I felt the shift immediately. The attorney had already acted. "We've placed a temporary hold on further fund movement," the representative continued. "Escrow is under review." Under review? Has the seller's disbursement cleared fully? I asked. "Not entirely," she said. "Funds are partially frozen pending verification." Partially frozen. The momentum had shifted. This wasn't just a family conflict anymore. It was a procedural interruption. Escrow freezes trigger investigation. Investigation triggers documentation requests. Documentation triggers exposure. "Thank you," I said calmly. When I ended the call, I sat still for a moment. The confrontation hadn't happened yet. But the structure had already begun correcting itself. And structure moves faster than emotion. I didn't go to their house. I invited them to mine. When they arrived, they looked cautious rather than confident. My mother's posture was rigid. My father carried the same folder I had seen on my birthday, though thinner now. We sat at my kitchen table. I placed the original deed in front of them first. "This is the transfer you signed 10 years ago," I said calmly. "The one that made me sole owner." My father's eyes flicked to the page but didn't linger. Then I placed the recorded closing document beside it. "And this is the sale you processed 3 days before my birthday." Silence. My mother clasped her hands tightly. "You knew?" she asked. "Yes." My father inhaled slowly. "We didn't think you'd notice." The sentence carried more weight than he intended. I slid the notarization page forward. "The ID used for the seller's signature isn't mine," I said. "The signature doesn't match. The bank has flagged the escrow." My mother's face was drained of color. "We were going to explain," she said weakly. "When?" I asked. My father looked down at the table. It was easier this way, he muttered. Easier. I reached into the ceramic bowl near the door and retrieved the original house key. This is the key you gave me, I said, placing it between us. You said the house was protected in my name. It was, he insisted. Until it wasn't. No raised voices. No accusations shouted across the room. Just documentation. The deed. The forged signature. The escrow freeze confirmation. You thought I wouldn't check, I said evenly. He didn't answer. You thought I'd accept the story over the paperwork. My mother's voice trembled. We needed the money. So you took it, I replied. The inversion wasn't dramatic. 10 years ago he held out his hand and took my key. Now the key sat on the table and the law stood behind me. You have two options, I said calmly. Cooperate with the reversal process or allow the investigation to proceed publicly. The room felt smaller. My father's authority had dissolved into consequence. And for the first time they were the ones waiting for my decision. Neither of them spoke for a long time. My father's gaze stayed fixed on the deed as if staring long enough might change the ink. My mother's hands trembled slightly against the table, the sound barely audible but unmistakable. You reported it, my father said finally. I corrected it, I replied. There was no anger in my voice. No satisfaction. Just precision. The bank froze the escrow, I continued. Title is under review. The buyer's attorney has been notified. The words felt clinical but they carried weight. My mother inhaled sharply. This could ruin us. The sentence echoed differently than it had a decade ago. 10 years earlier I was the one accused of ruining them. Now the vulnerability has shifted. It doesn't have to, I said calmly. But it will require honesty. My father leaned back in his chair, shoulders no longer squared with certainty. We were trying to protect ourselves. From what? I asked. He didn't answer. Because the answer was obvious. They had prioritized convenience over consent. Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't accusatory. It was structural. The hierarchy that once allowed them to decide my place had collapsed quietly. Not because I shouted. Because I documented. And documentation once presented does not bend to emotion. The next 48 hours moved faster than any argument ever could. The title company issued a formal notice of dispute. The buyer's attorney requested clarification. The escrow account remained frozen, while identity verification procedures were initiated. My attorney filed a petition to invalidate the transfer based on fraudulent execution. There was no dramatic courtroom scene. No public spectacle. Just paperwork moving through the proper channels. The buyer withdrew from the contract once the dispute became clear. The sale was nullified pending investigation. The forged signature was escalated to the county recorder's office for review. My parents received formal correspondence outlining potential legal exposure. Fraud. Misrepresentation. Improper notarization. Words that once belonged to distant news articles now sit on official letterheads addressed to them. I didn't escalate further than necessary. I didn't seek damages. I didn't pursue criminal charges. The goal was correction, not destruction. The house was restored to my name in the public record. The funds that had not cleared were returned. The structural imbalance corrected itself. Quietly. Legally. Without raised voices. Accountability doesn't require rage. It requires process. And the process had done what confrontation alone never could. After the paperwork settled and the house returned fully to my name, I sat at my desk and placed the original deed back into its folder. The key remained in the bowl by the door. Exactly where I left it. They thought I wouldn't check. They forgot I always keep records. For years I allowed trust to substitute for verification. I believed family intentions outweighed documentation. That loyalty meant I didn't need to confirm signatures or question processes. But adulthood taught me something quieter. Trust and structure are not opposites. They are partners. The night they took my key, I learned that belonging can be conditional. The night I heard the whisper, I learned that documentation is permanent. My parents didn't set out to become villains in their own story. They made decisions rooted in urgency and pride. But urgency does not excuse deception. And pride does not override ownership. I didn't scream. I didn't humiliate them publicly. I corrected the record. Because correction is stronger than revenge. The house stands as it always did. Not as a symbol of inheritance but as proof of preparation. They thought I wouldn't check. They assumed emotion would outweigh structure. But emotion fades. Records remain. And I will always read the fine print.